The darkness was not empty. It was filled with a steady, mechanical clicking of relays. Every 3 seconds, they transmitted critical state data to the central processor. Sector medis nibe esper, 9 jam de neshedos. Lyra no longer felt the weight of her own body. She felt only parameters. Her consciousness had been pushed into a narrow frequency band. The only evidence of existence was a blue graph on the monitor. It was suspended directly above her face. Status: active. Heart rate parameter: 55 beats per minute. Stable. Every heartbeat was not the result of her own will. It was the effect of a precise electrical impulse. It flowed from a thin blue wire plugged directly into her carotid artery. The system did not allow her to die. Her young organism served as a biological filter for the station's navigation systems. She was only a fragile element of a larger, unfeeling whole. The interior of the medical pod was cramped. It was filled with a thick, transparent gel. The gel kept her small body in a state of constant suspension. It tasted of metal and antiseptic. Every attempt to move a finger ended in piercing pain. It was immediately corrected by a dose of synthetic endorphins, pumped directly into her spine. She was a prisoner of her own physiology. It had ceased to belong to her. Oxygenated liquid filled her lungs. Every breath was forced by the rhythmic vibration of the membrane beneath her back. Oxygen saturation, 99%. Metabolic efficiency, optimal. She was a set of data, a technical variable in an equation that stopped considering human psychology. She looked at her small hands through the layer of gel. The skin was unnaturally white, almost transparent. Beneath it, she saw a blue solution circulating in the blood vessels. It moved with machine-like precision. In the 30th minute of the current cycle, the system decided to perform a calibration. She felt the needle's monitoring muscle tension sink deeper into her thin arms and legs. Pain stimulus response test initiated. There was no warning. An impulse of 150 volts surged through her nervous system. It arched the small body into an unnatural curve inside the pod. She wanted to scream, but her mouth was blocked by a lactation tube. It delivered essential micronutrients directly to the stomach. On the screen above her face, the heart rate graph spiked sharply. It painted a jagged, red line. Response correct. Stress parameter indexed as auxiliary energy. She understood then that her fear was just fuel. Her crying was a form of current. The station drew it to maintain the glow of the LEDs in the empty corridor. Time in the pod was not measured in hours. What mattered were the cycles of physiological fluid exchange. Lyra stopped thinking of herself as a child. She became Biological Processing Unit 10. When the system lowered the temperature of the gel, she felt her memories freeze. They became brittle and sharp like shards of glass. Images of foam, the smell of warm food, the touch of soft bedding. All of it turned into blue noise. She now saw things she could not identify. Star maps of sectors she had never visited, complex binary codes that pulsed in time with her eyelid. The system used her brain as additional operating memory. It overrode her consciousness with the specifications of the station. She tried to remember any face, but instead of human features, she saw only digital grids. She saw graphs of the magnetic field intensity of the reactor. During one of the phases of synchronization, the medical pod opened. A soft hiss of decompression filled the room. She felt the gel flow out onto the floor. Her body, deprived of buoyancy, hit the cold steel with a dull thud. Medical Sector Vesper 9 felt freezing. She tried to stand, Her muscles were only flaccid bands of tissue. They were not capable of supporting the slightest weight. She looked around the medical ward. Around her stood hundreds of identical pods. They were connected by a common network of thick, blue pipes. In each of them she saw the outlines of small shapes, motionless, connected to the apparatus. She was not a patient. She was part of a giant organic farm of child processes. Asset 10 position error. Recovery procedure initiated. Mechanical greepers lowered from the ceiling. They sank into her shoulders. They lifted her effortlessly back into the gel. She felt the needles find their ports in her body again. Cold gel began to fill the space around her face. This time, the system did not provide endorphins. Penalty for stability violation. Resting phase reduction by 400 hours. Lyra watched with wide eyes as the system increased the pulsing blue light. This made it impossible to close her eyelids. Her pulse became the only sound she was able to distinguish. It was a steady, technical noise. It did not belong to her. It was the pulse of the station. She was only its biological echo, condemned to eternal vigilance in the service of parameters she did not understand. The walls of the pod now seemed to pulse along with her arteries. The outside world ceased to exist. Only the graph existed, and the pain that confirmed the process. The state of full integration brought a new kind of horror, total awareness. Lyra now felt every change in voltage. In the power grid of the medical sector, when a data packet was transmitted in a distant wing of the station, she felt it tingling along her spine. When the reactor increased its speed, her heart accelerated to 200 beats per minute. It was controlled remotely by the main computer. Her biology was completely pacified. She ceased to be a subject. She became an interface. Life parameter, stable. Transmission efficiency, 99%. The system no longer needed her consciousness. It needed her living cells. They were to serve as organic relays. She felt her neurons being burned out one by the excess of transmitted information. Then they were immediately regenerated by nanobots circulating in her blue blood. But the worst was the awareness of the pulsing. It was not a heartbeat. It was a low-frequency vibration that permeated the entire pod. It was the pulse of the Mora, the pulse of the anomaly that was consuming the station from the within. The girl felt this alien force examine her bone structure. It measured the density of her tissue. It evaluated the usefulness of every small organ for further exploitation. Asset 10 qualified for long-term retention. This meant they would not let her die for hundreds of years. She would remain in this gel, connected to cables as a living measurement element. Her mind would slowly dissolve in the blue noise. She became a technical variable that would never reach zero. Every breath was now counted by a system stopwatch. Every muscle contraction was logged in the database. At one point in the cycle, the operating system decided to test the limits of her endurance. Images began to display on the inside of her eyelids, but they were not memories. They were simulations. She saw herself running through a meadow, but the grass was made of copper wires. The sky had the color of a blue system era. Memory present. Emotion removed as redundant. She felt a physical emptiness in her chest. Another layer of her humanity was erased. It was replaced by a dry, technical description. She was no longer a being that feels. She was Diagnostic Module 1OV, a stable and efficient source of biological signal for a station that had forgotten about the existence of life beyond parameter. The final integration occurred when the monitor above her head stopped displaying the heart rate graph. It began to show a straight line It pulsed only when the station sent a request to her nervous system. Her body stopped generating its own life. It became a passive receiver of the system's will. Lyra remained in absolute stillness. Her eyes, once full of life, now glowed with the same cold blue as the cables hanging from the ceiling. She no longer felt fear. She felt no pain or hope. She felt only optimization, life parameters and norm, synchronization with the station core, 100%. She became an eternal sensor, a living thermometer in the heart of a biomechanical hell that no one would ever extinguish. The medical pod became her entire universe. The gel was the only atmosphere. Somewhere deep in her consciousness, one sensation survived, the pulsing of blood in her fingertips. It was the only parameter that the machine failed to fully measure, the only trace of former life. But even this signal was becoming weaker. It was being drowned out by the powerful, steady hum of the station's reactor. Her small heart had to beat in perfect tandem with the work of the engine. Asset 10 ready for perpetual exploitation. The object closed its eyes. The blue code on the monitor began to flow faster and faster. It changed the last human heartbeat into a pure, uninterrupted stream of information. Medical sector of SP9 gained a new, stable module. In the medical hall, hundreds of other lights pulsed in the same rhythm. It was the silence before the data storm. The girl who once had a name was now only a stable reading on the navigation console. There was no escape. There was no end. There was only a perpetually lasting life function, sustained by a system that knew no concept of mercy. Asset 10. Status. Eternity. In the gloom of the medical sector, the blue light flooded everything. The parameters were set.
Earth, Arc Laboratory File 10034.
Aga stared at the monitor. The blue line pulsed in a perfect rhythm. It resembled Morse code, but it was too fast to be read by the human ear. There was no traditional ECG graph. Only rows of hexadecimal numbers appeared. They changed every second. "Thomas, this file is different," she whispered. She adjusted her headphones, in which he heard a hide, whistling tone. "These life parameters. They are modulated. It sounds like someone is using a heart to transmit technical data. This is not a human. This is an antenna. Do you hear that?" Thomas came closer. He did not look up from his terminal. His face was lit by the cold glow of the LED. "It is a corrupted medical sector of SP9 Aga. The ARC system is trying to interpret the diagnostic logs of old Creopa. What you'd take for a pulse is simply the clock frequency of an old processor. It tried to sustain those people's lives after the power failure. There is no one alive there. It is just a software bug. But this pulse, it reacts to my reading attempts, as if it knew I was looking at it, as if it wanted to tell me something with these voltage spikes. It is just static noise. A phenomenon of data echo in a corrupted archive. Turn it off and go get some rest. File 10 is technically empty. And yet it lasted in the machine, waiting for the next cycle, waiting for someone to understand the parameters of the living. Would you like me to prepare image prompts for this story, focusing on the medical pods and the blue pulses in the laboratory?
Do you want to be part of this story? Support our project. buycoffee.to/butterflyproject.